Yeah, speaking of which, the Polish army, they said they shoot down some Russian drones inside Poland's airspace. Um, what's your view on that? Because Poland is a NATO member, and it seems like it is still over, the war is.
Yeah, well, it is. It's, I mean, it's absolutely part of the war. And I should say, I've seen the debris from the drones, and there's no doubt at all that they're Russian drones.
Hmm.
And by the way, the Russian Defense Ministry has interestingly made a comment which basically admits that they are likely to be Russian drones.
Hmm.
Well, when you look at this yeah, I did a program about this earlier on my channel. It hasn't yet come out, but I made it before the Russian Defense Ministry statement. The drones in question are a type of drone called the Garbala drone, which is unarmed. It doesn't carry a warhead. It's a decoy. It's a decoy
Okay.
drone. So the Russians carried out a big drone and missile strike on Western Ukraine. The Ukrainian defenses are massively depleted. Some of the decoy drones, which were not guided against targets, but were not shot down by the Ukrainians, just carried on flying,
Hmm.
and they crossed the border into Poland. The Russians have offered to meet with the Poles in order to discuss this, and I'm going to make a guess that they'll offer compensation.
Okay. Now the Polish new president, he's relatively new, right?
Yeah,
Um,
Nawrocki. Mhm.
yeah, he Navrosky, yeah, he is. Do you sense a little bit policy shift? I feel like
Yeah,
there's some. First of all, there is an incident like maybe a month ago. There was a concert, and then somebody took out a red and black flag, which is the Ukrainians Nazi flag. Azov's flag, at my understanding, and that angered
yeah,
the Poles very much, and so they told the Ukraine, "You need to ban this," and something. I sense like Navrosky.
Nawrocki.
I got the sense that he doesn't want too much involved into Ukraine war anymore. Is that
That's absolutely correct. That is exactly
okay?
right. Now, I know I have a lot of friends in Poland. It's a
Hmm.
country I know quite well, actually. And the thing to say about Poland is it is a much more complicated and interesting society than people understand. So the assumption that all Poles hate Russians, for example, is a Western
Hmm.
misrepresentation. I mean, a lot of Poles do hate Russians, but
Hmm.
it is not as straightforward as that. And at a personal level, Poles and Russians, because they're both Slavs and they have
Hmm.
many things in common, understand and get on with each other reasonably well. Anyway, Poland got far too deeply involved in the conflict in Ukraine,
Hmm.
and they began to understand and regret that about a year plus ago. And the previous Polish government um, began to distance itself from Ukraine, but then it was replaced by the current government, led by Donald Tusk, who
Hmm.
again recommitted Poland to assisting Ukraine. That has provoked a further reaction within Poland, and there was the elections, and Nawrocki won the elections as a Polish nationalist, which he is, by the way,
Hmm.
but as a Polish nationalist who would look at Poland's interests and who made it clear that these interests did not extend to fighting Russia
Hmm.
for Ukraine. And he has gradually started. I mean, it does. His election does represent a shift in sentiment on this issue in Poland. Now, the president in Poland is important. He is an important official. He's not just a ceremonial figure,
Hmm.
but power mostly lies with the prime minister, who
Hmm.
continues to be Donald Tusk, who takes a harder line.
Hmm.
But Tusk's popularity is falling, and the expectations are that his government will fall before long. And we could perhaps start to see a further change in Poland as well. If the Russians handle this incident with the drones intelligently, and perhaps do offer compensation and do provide, satisfactory explanations which reasonable people will accept. Of course, many people will never accept them. I mean, there will always be people who
Hmm.
will say, this is Putin, the Machiavellian person who's deliberately sending drones without warheads into Poland for some completely unknown reason. Anyway, if the Russians actually handle this well, actually it might even make the process of Polish disengagement from the Ukraine conflict faster. But we'll see.
And then also, I always wondered this NATO Article 5. So even let's say somebody, hardliner in Poland, demand, okay, this is invasion, what have you, demand the NATO to do something. I'm not sure NATO would do anything. The Article 5 actually doesn't say that you need to take military actions immediately. It just said attack to one member is equal to attack to all members. But when somebody attacked, and look at Qatar, nothing will happen. So it doesn't mean automatically all the members will take military actions, right?
That's
So
absolutely that is absolutely correct. Article 5 is much more loosely worded than people think, and that was so because the United States in the 1940s, during the negotiations for the Washington Treaty, insisted on that. I mean, they did not want to make the kind of cast iron commitment to go to war on behalf of Britain and France and the other NATO states that many people in Europe wanted them to. So you're quite right. Article 5 is not a cast iron commitment to go to war if one country is attacked.
and we have to talk about the Kaja Kallas. So you know that, right? She gave a speech basically denying China and Russia played much role in World War II. it's this is a new low. Okay, we know that the West didn't want to recognize what the contributions by the Soviet and totally ignore what's going on in Asia, China's role. But now she's basically trying to rewrite history, right?
Well, completely rewrite history, and given the role that some Estonians played, I'm not going to say everybody in Estonia, but some Estonians played during the war, when quite a significant number, let's put it like that, enrolled in the SS. I would have thought that this was a topic that she as an Estonian would want to avoid. But I mean, she said this, and I have to say, the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded in the way that it always does, very, very polite, basically. I mean, but as somebody put it very well, it came as close as it ever does to calling someone an idiot.
Yeah.
Which, to be frank, Kaja Kallas is. I should say this is. I mean, again, as a European, I feel so embarrassed that my continent and my cultural sphere, if you like, is represented by a fool like this. I mean, not just a fool, but I mean, to talk in that way. And you're absolutely right about the rewriting of history is going on incessantly in Europe.
Yeah, and before you know it, they're going to say it's China or Russia who dropped the atomic bomb in Japan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I
surprised.
know. Don't be surprised if we actually get there.
Yeah. Even so, I do think China was pretty angry because they did use the word firmly opposes and strongly condemn this. So for China, that's pretty tough.
That is very strong language, I agree. Yeah.
That China is pretty angry about this, and which also shows that it is important for China and Russia to keep on doing these kind of a parade, remembering the World War II. Because if you don't, the whole history will be rewritten, controlled by the Western narrative, which is dangerous. I think it's dangerous.
Is incredibly dangerous. I mean, this is, I think, what we were discussing in last week's program, and this is one of the most interesting facts that came out of the events of the last week, which is, and this initiative, from both Xi Jinping and from Putin, that they were the two countries that bore the burden of the battle. They absolutely did. Anybody who pretends or argues that they didn't is either a scoundrel or a fool. And because of that, they owe it to their ancestors to act as trustees to the memory of that sacrifice and to what the two nations achieved together in defeating Nazism, militarism, Japanese militarism, fascism, and all of these things. And I think I think that's absolutely right. And I think we can see with every single day that passes, and this incessant attempt to rewrite the Second World War that is taking place, that it is exactly as you said, becoming more important than ever. The Chinese and the Russians will prevail here because
Now,
they have
even
truth on their
on their
side.
side, yeah.
Mm.
Isn't Kaja Kallas' grandfather, was he a Nazi or Nazi sympathizer? I
I
read
don't.
something.
I believe so, but I
Yeah.
don't know
Okay.
her whole
Okay.
story, and I don't.
Uh-huh.
I know that other members of her family were
Uh-huh. Okay.
members of the Communist Party apparatus in the
Uh-huh.
Soviet Union. So
Okay.
they switched around and moved
Okay.
about, and behaved in a deeply opportunistic way, which is
Mhm.
again something which, by the way, you found that a lot in East European communist
Mhm.
parties. China never has had that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about this START treaty, which is a arms control, arms strategic arms reduction on the nuclear weapons. It's a great treaty. I think it's good that they have that
Yeah.
one. Can you give a brief history about this treaty? And it is going
Well,
to expire next
well,
year, right?
a very brief history. I mean, arms control between the United States and the Soviet Union begins in the late 1960s, to be precise, at a meeting that the Soviets and the Americans had in the United States in a place called Glassboro, I believe in Massachusetts. And that then set in train a whole series of negotiations. And they began with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was ultimately an American initiative, but one that the Soviets supported. That there'd already been various test ban treaties. Then in 1972, there was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. And then there was the first Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, which put a cap on the number of strategic nuclear weapons that the Soviet Union and the United States had. And this was absolutely the foundation of what was called détente between the
Mhm.
Soviets and the
Mhm.
Americans during the later period of the Cold War. And that process continued, and there were ups and downs, but it never entirely broke down. So, where we had SALT 1, and then we had SALT 2, which was signed by Carter and Brezhnev, then Gorbachev and I think it was Reagan
Reagan, yeah.
had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which basically did away with missiles below a certain range, which would be used in Europe. And then there was the first of the START treaties, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties, which actually reduced the numbers of weapons that the superpowers had. And bear in mind, the Soviet and American superpowers had and still have well over 90% of all the world's nuclear weapons. And then there was the START True Treaty, which followed under Obama, which reduced the missile arsenals, the nuclear missile arsenals, still further. So this was a very good treaty.
Mhm.
It meant that we did not have an uncontrolled arms race. But then what started to happen, especially after the start of the Ukraine crisis, is that the entire process of arms control at the initiative of the United States has begun to break down. So the United States pulled out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. This happened under George W. Bush. Then it pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And they did that because they wanted to install medium-range nuclear weapons within range of China. They're now wanting to do that within range of Russia as well. And then, of course, the START treaty is now in crisis because there's been no negotiations on a follow up since the time when it was concluded in Obama's time. It's due to expire in February.
Mhm.
The Russians have various times indicated that they would be prepared to extend it to allow more time for negotiations. The Americans have shown little interest in this, and they've now tried to complicate everything by saying that the next negotiation must involve China too. And what they want is to have at least as many, probably more, nuclear weapons than Russia and China combined.
Mhm.
And the Russians will not agree to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course,
Well,
China
even, yeah.
won't agree to it either. I mean, that's
Yeah.
an absurd proposition.
So if nothing is done by February next year, there will not be that treaty anymore.
There will not be that treaty, and we will be in a world without nuclear weapons arms control. The only thing that will be left will be the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is already in deep crisis because the United States violated it a few months ago in June when it, contrary to the provisions of the treaty, attacked peaceful nuclear sites in Iran. So the whole system is on the brink of complete collapse. And
It's
that is unbelievably dangerous.
yes. I mean, wow. And China would not be would compared to Russia and the US, China has way less, right? So
Far,
you
far less.
yeah, so
Far, far less.
one understand China doesn't want to participate in this, like, but the two of them are not going to do anything. So
The problem is not that China is not interested in
mhm,
arms control. I've no doubt that China would welcome arms
mhm,
control.
yeah,
What China will not agree to is a situation in which the United States is given um, permanent and legally binding superiority in
yeah,
nuclear weapons over
yeah.
China.
Mhm,
Because the risk involved in that is that the United States then acquires a first strike
yeah.
capability, which
Mhm,
China cannot respond to. China has always made it clear that it is not interested in having as many nuclear weapons as the
mhm,
United States and Russia are. I mean, its position, as I understand it, is that it will have enough. It
yeah.
won't go beyond that.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
mean, it's not chasing the Americans or
mhm,
indeed the Russians, but neither will it be put into a position where it is permanently at a disadvantage,
mhm.
given how hostile the United States is towards it. So, yes, I think that if the United States gave up on this idea that it must be number one, we could probably get to some kind of negotiation. But of course, at the moment, it won't. And the other great problem is that I don't get the sense that the Americans take the question of extending START to very seriously.
Mhm.
Instead of it being discussed as it should be every day and being a major topic in the media, hardly anybody knows about it.
I I this is purely my opinion. I think China's
Yeah,
view
yeah.
on the nuclear weapons changed in around 2015. Why do I say that? I think before that, I told you, right, there were conversations between the US militaries and the Chinese military. And the Chinese military even told them that, yeah, I know, United States can destroy China hundreds of times over. We're satisfied to destroy the US just one time. So
Mm.
as long as we have enough, right, there is no
Yeah.
need to
Yes.
increase endless amount of nuclear weapons. But I think it changes somewhat because I think 2015, remember Albert Jacobi, he wrote a paper. In that paper, it's about the nuclear strategy, and he made it very clear. He said if when conventional weapons that the US no longer has advantage, we definitely need to think about nuclear weapons as an option, as a
Yeah.
viable option, and make it
Yes.
very clear to China. When you read something like that, what would you do? I mean,
Well,
anybody in
exactly.
China's position will not just sit there waiting, right? Of
No.
course, they're going to change their nuclear policy.
Well, of
So
course they
I
are,
think after,
especially given that the United States consistently pursues a first strike capability.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
given that this is so, I mean, it is driving the need for countries, not just China, by the way,
mhm,
but for more and more countries around the world to either acquire nuclear weapons or to think about doing so. And it's brought the whole system of nuclear arms control for which, as I said, has existed continuously since the 1960s. It's brought it to the point of not just crisis, but of total collapse. And that is incredibly frightening to me, who lived through the Cold War. I cannot begin to tell you how frightening it is. I mean, one of the things that was always a reassuring whenever there was, a crisis between the Soviet Union and the United States was that we at least knew that they had the nuclear weapons thing under some degree of control, because that was the ultimate fear. But now that looks like it's gone. And we were talking earlier in the program about these people having no restraints, thrown off all restraints. And so the combination of all that is extremely, extremely frightening.
That's what I'm thinking. Look at what just happened in Qatar. Qatar is supposed to be a U.S. ally.
Yeah.
And the U.S. did nothing to protect Qatar and Israel. What if Israel just decided one day, for whatever reason, drop atomic bombs somewhere in the Middle East?
That terrifying prospect is becoming a more real one.
Yeah.
I mean, given, as we said, how Israel has embraced a road of violence right across the Middle East at the moment. I mean, who can say where it will stop?
Yeah.
If, for example, they get into another conflict with Iran, and that doesn't go well, who can assume that at that point they will hold back from using nuclear weapons? I certainly can't.
No, nobody can. The only body can stop that is the United States, but the United States is not going to. So, well,
exactly.
We will see what happened to start. I mean, if that expired just by itself, nothing happened. It is a really scary situation.
It is a very scary thing. The thing that needs to be done, I mean, first of all, START obviously does need to be extended. And again, it's very troubling that hasn't happened. Apparently the Russians have brought it up several times, and Putin brought it up with Trump at Anchorage, but didn't apparently find Trump very responsive, because Trump didn't seem to be very interested in the matter. But what needs to happen in order to get arms control back on track is for there to be a general relaxation of tensions. I mean, that was what happened in the 60s. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which scared the superpowers. And they said to themselves, my God, we can't let this get out of control. And so we had the following year, the first nuclear test ban treaty. And then that led, as I said, to the summit meeting in Glasgow in the United States. And out of that, we had both détente and then nuclear arms control. The one steadily followed from the other. So there has to be a relaxation of tensions. Trump should have gone to Beijing, met with the leaders there. He's now apparently talked about inviting Putin and Xi to the G20 meeting in Florida. He has to, I mean, I would love to see everybody together, but he has to work consistently to make that happen and to change the political mood in the West, which, to say that it's becoming hysterical and dangerous is a frightening understatement.
I don't trust Trump anymore. I mean,
no, I don't know who does. I mean, that's the trouble.